Today, I want to talk to you about everyone's favorite Star Trek villain, the Kazon. Just kidding. No, the Kazon were very unpopular. I would venture to say that the Kazon on the pantheon of Star Trek villains among the fandom are probably the Jar Jar Binks of Star Trek villains. And I think that's a shame because I think the Kazon were a tremendous opportunity missed to explore some very complicated subjects, some uncomfortable subjects for Trek, and to break new ground and to really speak to that social commentary mixed with adventure and entertainment that Star Trek's always been known from. We have to start with the Kazon with what they were originally designed to be and get to where they went wrong and how in some very simple ways they could have gotten them back on track quicker. The Kazon were, of course, the villains in the first and second seasons of Star Trek Voyager. They were the primary antagonist in season two. That was mainly spearheaded by Michael Piller, who was part of the trifecta of producers over there with Braga and Jerry Taylor. Uh, his idea for the Kazon was to be an allegory for LA street gangs. And you have to understand, in the concept of the people at the time, these were very well to do, primarily white people who were trying to do the right thing, who were trying to speak to a serious social issue. And bear in mind, this was, from their vantage point, not that far after the LA riots. Uh, which sadly, those things are still with us and continue to be real issues to this day. But I think the problem was when they started with the LA street gang analogy, they very quickly, and I think unintentionally, I think sincerely, unintentionally, ended up creating a very racist caricature and one that wasn't entertaining for anyone to watch, and that's sad. When you look at the street gang analogy, what they were really going for with the violent sex and the shifting allegiances and shifting lack of stability was to be a departure from the Alpha Quadrant, which is really just a quadrant of empires that all border each other and the small fish that are in between. What they wanted to do was create a more wide open region with less stabilizing dominant forces. And so you had the Kazon, the Vidians, and so on. So with the Kazon, you had this opportunity to tell this incredible story about this race of people who had been brutally oppressed by another race called the Trade, and who united, who were systematically pitted against each other, who somehow united and not only overthrew the Trade and gave their freedom, but achieved dominance over the Trade, drove them off the homeworld to a person. Uh, that's an impressive feat, but those aren't the people we were shown. So if you look at the pilot caretaker, they get off to a bad start right there. One thing that worked to their disadvantage was coming out that same season, superficially looking a lot like Klingons, not having young actors, which is what their original intention was. That the Kazon would all be teenage boys. They weren't able to find actors that they thought could carry that, so they cast adults. And this was at the same time on Deep Space Nine that you have the Klingon arc going on. So I can understand on a superficial level to the audience, they look like watered down Klingons, which is the number one criticism you're going to get from them. The second criticism is that the Kazon is somehow dumb, but this is a myth. Again, the Kazon somehow managed to master trade technology to the point that they were able to not only beat them at their own game, but take their ships, their industry, and entire planets. That's an amazing undertaking. That's not something that I would characterize as dumb. In many ways, they're like the Bajorans without the Federation help, which makes Janeway's reactions to and the Voyager crew's reactions to them kind of strange and off-putting. But I'll get to that in a second. Now, the second biggest myth about the Kazon is that they're just going around jacking everybody. They're just going around. But that's not how they work, and that's not how gangs work in the real world. The Kazon clearly actually have good relationships with a lot of the races Voyager encounters, which is how they're able to give Voyager a bad reputation across the region in seasons 1 and 2. I mean, let's be logical here. If the Kazon really are as they are presented to the audience, um, then people would be beating down Voyager's doorstep to form an alliance with this captain who can defy the Majas, this captain who the Majas fear so much, this amazing ship Voyager, the ship of freedom. Uh, you know, Janeway would become an instant folk hero. Uh, so it doesn't really make sense. Clearly, the Kazon have friendly relations, or at least neutral relations, or at least are capable of having working relationships, not only with each other, but with other species. And the show actually backs that up and then steps on that at the same time. So you can't look at what people say about the Kazon, you have to look at what the episodes actually demonstrate. A third one that gets thrown out there all the time is that how the Kazon are the Borg wouldn't even want to assimilate them. You got to understand that that's been really overstated. The whole point of assimilation is that the Borg are getting the biological and technological distinctiveness of other species, things that they need. The Kazon just don't happen to have anything that they need. And really, when you think about that, probably 90% of sentient life in the galaxy doesn't have anything the Borg need at this point. The more advanced the Borg become, the less chance lower technologically advanced species have to fear of them. So I think that was something that was overstated. I think the line was kind of a little wink joke to fans who didn't like the Kazon, and that was it. You also have to look at um, why Voyager and the Kazon come into conflict, because it's always put as if the Kazon are again just these big ignorant thugs. But you have to look at in Caretaker when they meet, they are impressed with Janeway's ability to have water, but it's more that she can create it out of thin air with seemingly a snap of her fingers. They run a mining operation on the Ocampa homeworld. That's a mining operation. You know what mining operations need? Lots of water. So it's not so much they couldn't just replicate water. There are ways of creating water without replicators that we can do right now with 20th century level of technology. It's more that she could create them out of thin air, and to a mining operation on a planet without any natural water sources, that's incredibly valuable. I mean, that's phenomenal. We would be incredibly impressed by that. And we're not as advanced as the Kazon are. So you also have to look at the fact that they started with the gang analogy, but they didn't follow through. They really did just make them watered down Klingons. And what you should have done is, with the gang analogy, is taken it to its basic conclusion. What is the first criminal enterprise, and the one criminal enterprise that all gangs are a part of? To territory, but they never get into what they do with it. Uh, and so, what you should have done with Voyager is actually have the Kazon occupy the space that used to be trade space. And we already know from Neelix, who I'll get to in a second, uh, that the trade had a very vast empire. They were very successful traders, and people who knew about the oppression of the Kazon either looked the other way or didn't know about it. And so after it's over and the Kazon took over, you would have whole pockets of space that would be run by different sects. Well, play with that. Play with that. So the Ogla are are space thugs. Okay, that's the Ogla. So the Nistrum are kind of sneaky and obsequious. Okay, well, maybe the Relora have a whole different model. Maybe the Relora are arms dealers. Maybe the Hobai are deal in illicit substances and smuggling. Maybe the Mistral uh, deal in the Las Vegas of the Delta Quadrant and are big into gambling. And they hold these giant races that people compete in and they fix them. You could do all sorts of different things with them with just the gang metaphor. But the other big thing, the one primary criminal enterprise that gangs enter is protection. People trust the Kazon over Voyager because they receive protection from the other sex by kicking up to the Kazon. And their relationship with the Kazon would depend on what sector you're talking about and with what sect. So people who live in Ogla space might very well just might be like afraid for their lives all the time, that the Ogla are going to constantly just come in, take what they want, and be happy they left you alive. On the other hand, if you live in Mistral space, if you just they come by once a month, you kick up their percentage. Not only do they not not only do they leave you alone, might not even might do you one better. They might help attack your rivals. They might help you establish more trade routes. They might put you in touch with other client states they have in order for you to make more profit. Because if you make more profit, then they make more profit. You see, just because a species might be aggressive doesn't mean it wouldn't act in self-interest. I mean, that implication is a little racist right there. So the problem is with the Kazon ultimately is not the concept of an analog for gang culture, but rather that they're continually demonstrated to be an analog for stereotypes of gang culture. I think there's also, we have to look at, and I think there is a weird vibe with how Voyager and Janeway deals with the Kazon. It's strange that she never realizes that Neelix has a bias against the Kazon, and it's obvious that the Kazon in general have a bias against Talaxians. Um, Despite the fact that Kazon clearly have trading or relationships with the Raskolva, or the Securians and others, they clearly don't with the Talaxians. And it's quite possible that Talax may have been one of those galactic powers that looked the other way during their oppression um, from the trade. It's quite possible they seem to disproportionately raid Talaxian convoys, and Neelix doesn't have anything nice to say about them. And anytime Neelix meets one of his old Kazon friends, it's usually because Neelix has done something dirty to them in the past that makes him untrustworthy. Why Janeway would take his advice so without question is very odd. It's also very odd that Janeway takes such a hard stance on trading technology. Again, considering all they initially wanted or impressed by was her ability to replicate water from thin air. Again, on a mining colony, you need a lot of water. That'd be impressive. But on top of that, when you look at how she handled the situation with the Vidians or the Hirogen, it seems completely at odds with that. And I think that's another mistake. If you don't believe me, rewatch Alliances. Janeway, it never occurs to Janeway that the root of the hostility between Voyager and the Kazon is that they look superficially and superficially act like their former oppressors. So it never occurs to the Kazon to take them at their word. But there were so many opportunities for so many storylines, an all-female sect of Kazon, and because we've never met a Kazon female, what would that be like? And it's just a wasted opportunity. I really encourage anybody who wants to actually understand gang culture or the origin of gangs and what Voyager could have been and its connection of LA gangs to the Black Power movement in the 60s and how the fall of that gave way to gangs like the Bloods and the Crips. I really recommend you check out a wonderful documentary called Bastards of the Party. At any rate, that's my take on it. But what do you think? I think the Kazon, like the Vidians, were really underdone, and I think the Kazon could have been like a different race every couple of weeks, and you could have had the Kazon arc for a long time because each time it would be different in a different dimension, and it would always be fresh. Anyway,